Forests are quiet, until they're not. Tonight we hear from 3 people who went into the woods and barely made it out. These are their stories. The sun was dipping below the tree line as Daniel, a park ranger in Oregon, made his rounds. The crowds were thinning, leaving him with an eerie sense of solitude. He paused at the edge of a clearing, listening to the wind rustling through the ancient pines. In the fading light, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist. It was time to close up the trail for the night. Daniel continued along the path, his boots crunching on the dry leaves. He hummed to himself, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of his neck. Just as he rounded a bend, a whisper, barely audible over the wind, stopped him. It was a hushed sound, like someone speaking directly into his ear. He froze, straining to hear over his own pounding heart. There it was again. This time, he could have sworn he heard his name. His hand instinctively went to his belt, gripping his radio. He scanned the woods, his eyes darting between the shadows. There was no one in sight. Taking a deep breath, Daniel told himself it was just the wind. He continued down the trail, but the hair on the back of his neck remained on end. The whispers seemed to follow him, growing louder with each step. He stopped again, drawn to a particularly gnarled pine tree at the edge of the path. Its twisted branches clawed at the sky, and its trunk was scarred and ancient. He realized the whispers were coming from the tree itself. He cautiously approached the tree, the whispering growing louder. He leaned in closer and peered into the hollow at its center. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a face staring back at him. He stumbled back in terror, tripping over a root and falling to the ground. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a young couple, Sarah and her boyfriend, were settling into their campsite for the night. The air was crisp and cool, the scent of pine needles heavy in the air. The first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Sarah snuggled closer to her boyfriend, a contented sigh escaping her lips. It was nights like these that made her feel truly alive. As the fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees, Sarah found herself captivated by the play of light and shadow. She loved the way the forest came alive at night, the sounds of crickets and owls creating a symphony of nature's music. Her boyfriend, exhausted from a day of hiking, had already drifted off to sleep. She, however, was wide awake. Suddenly, a flicker of light in the distance caught her eye. It was a faint yellowish glow, like someone was carrying a lantern through the woods. It bobbed and weaved in the darkness, moving in a slow, deliberate circle. Confused, she sat up, trying to get a better look. It didn't make sense. It was too late for other hikers. She gently shook her boyfriend awake. "Hey," she whispered, her voice tight with apprehension. "Do you see that?" He mumbled something incoherent and rolled over. "No, seriously," she insisted, her eyes glued to the strange light. "Look." He finally sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and followed her gaze. For a moment he too was silent, his eyes narrowed in confusion. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished. "What was that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her boyfriend chuckled, trying to sound reassuring, but she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Probably just some fireflies, babe. Or maybe moonlight reflecting off something." She wasn't convinced. Fireflies didn't move like that, and the moon was hidden behind clouds. Still, she didn't want to seem scared, so she let it go. She lay back down, pulling her sleeping bag tight around her, but sleep wouldn't come. Hours later, just as the first rays of dawn were beginning to paint the sky, Sarah was jolted awake by a strange sound. It was a soft, rhythmic thudding, like bare feet walking slowly on the forest floor. She held her breath, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time. It was definitely footsteps, and they were circling their tent. Terror gripped her heart. She reached out and shook her boyfriend awake. "Wake up!" she hissed. "There's someone outside!" He bolted upright, his eyes wide with alarm. They listened together, the silence inside the tent broken only by the sound of their own ragged breathing. Then, they heard it again. A distinct footstep, slow and deliberate, just outside their tent flap. Sarah was paralyzed with fear. She had never felt so vulnerable. The footsteps circled the tent once more, then stopped. Silence. They held their breath, waiting, listening, but the sound never returned. As soon as the sun was fully up, they cautiously emerged from their tent. They scanned the area around their campsite, their eyes searching for any sign of the intruder. And that's when they saw them. Footprints. Bare footprints. The prints led right up to the edge of their tent, clear as day in the soft earth. They followed the trail of prints, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The prints circled the tent just as they had heard them do in the dead of night. Then, just as abruptly as they had appeared, the footprints stopped. There was no sign of the intruder, no indication of where they had gone. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. Shaken to their core, Sarah and her boyfriend packed up their things and fled the campsite. They never went back. A month later, still haunted by the experience, Sarah stumbled upon an online forum dedicated to unexplained encounters in the wilderness. As she scrolled through the posts, her blood ran cold. There, buried in the archives, was a post from years ago describing an almost identical experience at the very same campsite. The post ended with a chilling sentence. "Sometimes I still hear it, outside." Eric, a popular survival YouTuber, was deep in the wilderness of Montana, filming his latest solo camping expedition. He had been dropped off by a bush plane days earlier, his backpack laden with camera gear and survival supplies. He had chosen a secluded spot near a pristine lake surrounded by towering pines. It was the perfect setting for his next video. He had set up 2 cameras to capture the experience. One, a GoPro, was mounted on a tree, offering a wide-angle view of his campsite. The other, a more powerful DSLR camera, was positioned inside his tent, set to record him as he slept. The first few days of the trip went off without a hitch. Eric was in his element, building a fire, foraging for food, and sharing his survival knowledge with his viewers. As the sun began to set on his 3rd day, Eric felt a familiar sense of unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He dismissed it as his imagination. He checked his cameras, making sure they were still rolling, then crawled into his tent. The forest came alive with the sounds of the night. He lay there, listening to the symphony of the night, his hand resting on the hunting knife he kept strapped to his leg. He closed his eyes, willing himself to sleep. But the feeling of being watched persisted. Hours later, in the cold pre-dawn hours, Eric was jolted awake by a strange sound. It was a soft, metallic click, like something had brushed against his tent. He lay there frozen, his heart pounding in his chest, listening intently. Silence. He told himself it was just a branch, moved by the wind. He lay there for what felt like hours, his senses on high alert, but the sound didn't repeat itself. Exhausted, he finally drifted back to sleep. He emerged from his tent, stretching his stiff muscles and taking a deep breath of the fresh morning air. He checked his cameras, relieved to see that they were both still running. He packed up his gear, eager to get back to civilization and share his latest adventure with his viewers. Back home, in the familiar comfort of his editing suite, Eric eagerly uploaded the footage from his trip. He started with the GoPro footage, his eyes glued to the screen as he watched himself building a fire, fishing in the lake, and setting traps. Everything seemed normal. Then, he came to the footage from the camera inside his tent. He had fast-forwarded through most of it, not expecting to see anything interesting. But as he reached the 3:17 a.m. mark, his blood ran cold. Some trails don't want to be walked, and some things in the woods aren't meant to be seen. Thanks for watching Unhinged Nightmares. Subscribe for more real horror stories every night. What's the creepiest thing you've seen in the forest?